Hello everyone, my name is Lowko, and today it is time for a professional match of Zerg versus Protoss. Spawning here on the left-hand side of Automaton and playing with the red Zerg drones. He's from Finland, he's the current World Champion of StarCraft 2. Of course that means we are looking inside of the main base of Serral. And his opponent on the right-hand side of the map, playing with the blue Protoss probes. One of the strongest Protoss players in Europe, we have none other than Drogo. So here we go, this should be an awesome matchup. Drogo, of course, always one of the highest ranked Protosses right here in Europe. I just quickly looked it up. He's the current rank 4 on the Grandmaster League ladder. And while Serral is actually currently unranked, he doesn't actually play that much ladder usually. Or whenever he does, he seems to always leave League as soon as he gets promoted to like rank 1 Grandmaster. It's a little bit odd, but he seems to use most of his practice time in custom games instead. Alrighty, so Drogo, as far as career victories go, his biggest victory, of course, was DreamHack Leipzig back in 2016, but he's always been a very, very scary Protoss player in general, and especially in the macro game, I do think he can actually put up a really good fight against Serral, so we'll see what ends up going down in this game. Now, Serral, of course, I mean, I've mentioned his victories many times before on the YouTube channel. Real quick, for 2018, first off, he ended up winning WCS Leipzig, WCS Austin, WCS Valencia, WCS Montreal, GSL versus the World Home Story Cup, and then the biggest victory at the end of the year was, of course, BlizzCon. Pretty insane run in 2018, and while Serral looks a little bit more mortal over the last few months, he still is a scary player. I mean, he ended up getting second place at the WESG, where he went up in the grand finals against Innovation, which he actually ended up losing 4-3. But it turns out, apparently, all throughout that event, Serral was feeling sick, and he even briefly contemplated not even going to China just because he wasn't feeling well. I guess in the end, he's probably pretty happy he went, because obviously even getting second place at the WESG is still a lot of earnings. Regardless, we'll see where Serral is going to take this game. Most of the time, though, he's that type of Zerg player who will respond to what you are doing. Now, exactly, that is what Serral's trying to find out right now. He's going to be able to scout right here with that very first Overlord, and he will indeed see that a Twilight Council is coming up here for Drogo. As far as the build order variety goes, for the Zerg versus Protoss matchup, for the longest time, we did see Stargate openers, and while they are very, very common still, nowadays there's quite a lot of variety, actually. A lot of Zerg players did get ridiculously good when it came to defending Stargate openers, so a lot of Protoss players nowadays are opting to go for something a little bit different, and this seems to be, I guess, Dark Templar into Archon drops or something along those lines. A couple links actually right now poking at the front as well, but since they know that their friend the Overlord already sacrificed its life for the scouting information, they decided not to commit. I think on paper, if both Zerg and Protoss play perfectly, it's almost always the Zerg player who comes out ahead out of the early game. The thing is, Protoss sort of has to play a little bit aggressive and deal a little bit of damage here and there, or at the very least, make it so that Zerg isn't just making a stupid amount of drones, because when Zerg is allowed to do that, they all of a sudden, Protoss that is, they found themselves going up against a scary amount of Zerg units. If Zerg manages to get about 66 drones, which is enough for full 3-base saturation, all of a sudden, right, the amount of unit production that can happen from the swarm is ridiculous, especially compared to Protoss. So it's really the task of the Protoss right here in the early game to deal a little bit of damage. And I've actually brought it up before, but I was watching a Hearthstone stream, actually at this point a couple months ago, but he mentioned that in a Zerg versus Protoss matchup, when he's the Protoss player, of course, he wants to kill about 10 drones. That's about his goal. If he kills less than 10 drones, he feels a little bit, he feels like he's up with his back against the wall. But if he kills more than that, obviously, he's going to be in a phenomenal spot. So I think that's probably what Drogo is looking to do here as well. But that's the thing about Serral. He usually doesn't take a lot of damage. Well, the Dark Shrine is done. Drogo does have 4 gateways finished up right now as well, and those are the 4 Dark Templar. I don't actually see any detection just yet, and Overseer is currently morphing in. Queens actually are pulled off the line, so they will be able to, at the very least, get rid of these Dank Templar here eventually, but the detection right now is really, really critical. I think, though, all things considered, this should be okay here for Serral, and this is what I mean. he doesn't waste any time, right? He could have gone ahead and made the lair 10 seconds earlier and not taken any damage right there on the hatchery. But in the grand scheme of things, spending those extra 10 seconds making additional workers is likely gonna give him that small advantage that will build up towards that really strong mid game that he's got. I actually asked a couple of the Protoss players that I know, and they all mentioned that whenever you play against Serral, it's kind of like you're playing against the perfect Zerg. You can't really get anything done. I mean, you try your best, you throw a variety of builds at him, and he seems to have the perfect response every single time, just barely making the correct amount of units, and it's just really, really hard to copy, but he seems to have an answer to basically everything. Okay, so it's gonna be a Spire play right here from Serral. By the way, so far, I don't think a single worker was lost just yet, and that's a rough spot here for Drogo. Finally, though, looks like he's gonna be able to get some kills. Ooh, those drones! Oh, they stacked up together for just a little bit. One of the Archons actually misfired there. I think if he did target there properly, he probably would have been able to kill at least a couple drones, but he's coming back out, and I think he should be able to get at least a couple of worker kills here finally. So there we go. That's a nice little bit of damage there for Drogo, getting 5 workers in the blink of an eye. Very, very nicely done. Now, this is a build that I saw Serral do quite a bit at WESG. He was going for Lings in the early game, transition towards Roach Ravager against that War Prism based play, but because he knows his opponent didn't open up with a Stargate, he goes for a Spire himself. When you go up against a Stargate early on, usually the option for Protoss to go Phoenixes is just a little bit too easy. Phoenixes, of course, are phenomenal when it comes to countering those Mutalisk, but a small clump of Mutas right now, he seems to get about 10 or so, I think, in these kind of moments. A small clump of Mutas right now can 100% pull a Protoss player apart. The thing is, once Protoss extends towards the third base, which is what Drogo obviously did right now, a lot of the units that are ready to defend are gonna hang out over at the third base as well. Usually the main base is very, very vulnerable, and there we go, Mutas indeed are coming up. Bailing Nest right now is a follow-up as well. We see the Evolution Chamber, researching +1 melee, a 4th hatchery is coming up, and now also an Infestation Pit. Now, I think this does get scouted here for Drogo. Really, really important there. He immediately does start up photon cannons in all of his mineral lines. That's absolutely critical. Plus, he also gets himself a couple of those Archons over at the third base. Now, it looks like he's taken a bit of a gamble there, hoping that those Mutas would head on over towards the third base rather than the main. But look at this, right? Really, really well done here by Drogo. Not taking any damage right now. He still has, of course, that War Prism remaining as well with the 2 Archons in it. That's gonna buy him enough time right now to finish up those photon cannons, and I think that's pretty much the best defense you can get right now if you are the Protoss. Really, really nicely done there by Drogo. And apparently, while the Forge just barely didn't finish up the upgrade just yet, the Mutas are gonna be deflected quite smoothly. Alrighty. So, where exactly is this game going to take us right now? Alright, well, the Mutas are gonna harass for a little while longer. Oftentimes what Serral does is he, like, just hangs them in a corner for a little while until much later on into the game. So he's likely just gonna hang them out over here for a little bit. And then once the Protoss is moving across the map with all of their units, that's when the Mutas go back in again as well. And they will usually just suicide themselves on a photon cannon while killing as many probes as possible. But anyways, it looks like in this game, Serral already has a follow-up plan right there as well, while apparently the Templar Archives takes a little bit of damage. It seems like most of the time, he likes to follow up with a quick Hive, and I guess also, well, he already has a Spire, obviously, but also a Greater Spire. The thing is, if Drogo doesn't hit Zerg in the face before those Brute Lords are out, oftentimes Protoss finds themselves in a really rough position. However, there's going to be a very vulnerable moment here in just a little bit, while the Greater Spire units are not out just yet. Great Archon positioning right there. Drogo is playing extremely well here, man. This is what I mean, like, Drogo's a genuinely scary opponent. Not really taking a whole lot of damage from a Muta switch, building up that really scary Protoss Death Bowl. The only thing I'm a little worried for right now is the timing of that Greater Spire. This is the moment where Zerg is most vulnerable. Look at this, right? This Zerg army is literally just a couple Mutas, Zerglings, Roaches, and then a couple of Ravagers as well, right? It's really not that much. It's really not that scary of an army. Whereas for Protoss, if we look at this is a very sophisticated unit composition. A lot of Zealots, a lot of Archons, Immortals. We see a few Sentries in there for Force Fields, and then most importantly, the High Templar with their Psionic Storm. However, if you wait another minute or so, if you're Protoss right now, you will find yourself up against Brute Lords. And if there's one unit that's really, really good at countering these Protoss ground units, it's the Brute Lord. 10 Brute Lords right now would 100% massacre this ground army. And the reason right now, I think, why Drogo isn't really making a move out just yet is because he's still dealing with these mutas. There's continuous Zergling run-bys and a little bit of aggression here and there. This is just Serral buying as much time as possible. Brute Lords are already morphing in right now, and I think the timing for Drogo is basically in the past. So many forced photon cannons as well, actually, man. I thought these mutas were dealt with really, really nicely, but so far it really doesn't happen. Anyways, Lings and Banes currently making a move right here for the third base of the Protoss player. Protoss currently moving across the map as well with the majority of the army, but there we go. Some good connections there on those Banelings, and that's 18 probes going down. Now that Protoss army is moving across the map, and guess what? Knock, knock, who's there? It's Brute Lords. What are you gonna do against Brute Lords right now? I guess you could try and storm them and maybe try and get the Stalkers and the Archons underneath. But Brute Lords on paper will beat this army every single time. Keep in mind, there's also still the Queens ready to transfuse here if they need to. It looks like Drogo is feeling the pressure. He decides to continuously move across the map right now, but he's still forced to deal with a whole lot of roaches here on the other side of the map as well. Dark Templar eventually are going to be able to clean that up. Protoss army looks like it's on its way to retreat. It did end up killing the fourth base here for Zerg, but what's the long-term plan right now for Protoss is more and more Lings and Roaches seem to flood across the map. It's actually mostly just Ravagers at this point in the game. The majority of the Protoss army, though, is still on the run. Zerg, though, this time around is not catching that Protoss army, but this is a really rough position right here to be in if you are Drogo. I think what Serral could do right now is just continuously push for a little while longer, although that is a lot of Archons. Blink is just about to finish up as well, so I think that Drogo, for now, is gonna be okay. Alright. That was a really good hold there by Serral, but you gotta keep in mind he did end up losing a base. If Serral did not kill those 18 or so probes over at the third, I think this actually would have been a really good position for Drogo still, even though he kind of missed his timing right there on those Brute Lords. Well, I think a couple more Brute Lords may very well end up dying. At the very least, one of the Corruptors will get picked off as well. But the thing is, right, in this scenario, Brute Lords just don't really get countered by Archons anymore. I think that Serral has figured out successfully as well that this is just a ground-based army. At that point, and by the way, the Muta still being a pain. At that point, the amount of work that Brute Lords can do is just insane, right? You just morph in more Brutes. Normally, a lot of Protoss players will go for Quick Tempest or something along those lines to try and deal with that. But if Zerg detects, hey, wait a second, there's no Tempest on the production tab, they will take, instead of like, or they will make rather than like 10 or so of those Brute Lords, they will go up to like 12 at this point. So there we go. We see even 15 Brute Lords right now coming up here for Serral. I do like the fact that Drogo is abusing the mobility right there of the Zerg army, so Zerg can't really defend both of those angles very easily. So once again, a base does get picked off there, but I'm a little bit worried here for the longevity of this Protoss army. We do see a fleet beacon coming up right here, as well as additional Stargates. That's 3 Stargates in total, but Drogo is he's on a bit of a timer right now, right? If these Brutes make their way across the map and they micro well, and there's no Tempest out to pick them off from a distance, I think actually that Serral might be able to clean up this game right here, right now. I think that actually Serral is making the assumption at this point that those Tempests are already waiting. I think that he's assuming that Drogo is baiting him into a bit of a trap. It's not the case, obviously, in this game, but I think that's why he's playing so carefully right now with the Brutes. If he were to move across the map, I think he could finish the game right here, right now. Instead, though, it is going to be a couple of Vipers right now on the production tab here for Serral. The thing is, he doesn't have much of a counter at this point, obviously, to Tempest. 3 Tempests are coming up here. Ooh, once again, a couple of Banelings trying to get a good connection here. But there's really no counter available right now for the Tempest. There's 3 Mutalisk, but they will likely not be enough here against 3 Tempest, I would say. And while the Dark Templar are still going to town here, they're just simply distracting the Zerg army, trying to buy as much time here for Protoss to get a couple of those Tempest out. And, well, it looks like at the very least that warrior right there is indeed going to be picked off, but it bought a lot of time right there for the Zerg army as well. or for the Protoss army right here as well. So this time around, okay, I like this a lot better. This time around, Drogo has himself 4 base economy. He has Tempest. He's got a very scary amount of units on the ground still left over. And he all of a sudden finds himself up against a unit composition that he can actually beat. More Tempests are coming up. We even see the attack weapon upgrade right now for those Protoss flyers as well. And while one Zealot apparently is taking a bit of a lunch break, sleeping on the job, no Zergling run-bys are being activated just yet. And I guess even if they were, I mean, there's still so many photon cannons left over from that Muta harass earlier into this game as well. Continued Bane harass right now as well for Serral, though, trying to get some value here, but those will all be picked off just fine with the Tempest. Now we're in an awkward spot, though, right? Because there's Vipers against, I guess, a bunch of Corruptors right here against these Tempest. If you can abduct those units, you're going to be in a pretty good spot. But in the late game, right, Protoss Air certainly is very scary, and these Brute Lords, right, if all of the Protoss army gets replaced with air units, those Brute Lords just sort of don't do anything anymore. So it looks like Serral is actually preparing for that ultimate late game, getting himself a lot of Spore Crawlers, a lot of static defense here in general. He just grabbed the base in the center. I think this is actually one of the most important mining locations for him right now, because he is going to start running on the 5, or he's going to start running low here on the 5 bases that he's got fairly quickly as well. Man, Drogo is playing this so patiently though, right? Great blink right there as well, not losing anything. Really, really nicely done. He's going to grab himself another Nexus right here. So this is going to be the fifth Nexus right here for Protoss. Getting himself a lot of Photon Cannons set up here. A couple Shield-y boys as well. That should be more than enough to defend against any kind of harass here for the time being. This is an awkward spot now, though, for Zerg, right? So I guess what he's trying to do is set up this harassing squad. Usually what Zerg needs to do is pick up those Protoss units from a distance. If you can abduct them, that's going to be a phenomenal spot. But obviously there's High Templar still, and there's also still Sonic Storm. The Brute Lords trying to rain some of their little, what are they called? The Brutelings on top of the High Templar. But at the same time, while the majority of the Zerg army is distracted on the right-hand side of the map, there's a bit of a push in right here with a lot of Archons from Drogo. If Zerg would not have left this many Ravagers behind, I think this actually would have been a dead base quite quickly. But luckily here for Serral, he does end up having enough units right there to defend against this amount of Archons here as well. I like that, actually. I think that's just enough units to use a tactical recall as well. I think they can all just stand in one little clump. And all get recalled here too. Anyways, Drogo is now building up that Protoss Death Bowl, right? I would even like to see him add on like a Mothership here. Even though obviously we did already see Vipers, I don't think it's a terrible idea. Just because it can still soak up so much damage. I mean, Motherships, I think they have like 800 hit points or so in total. 400 hit points and then like 400 shields. So I don't think it's a terrible idea to continue building that up. But regardless, Drogo is now smelling blood in the water with a unit composition that is completely maxed out of air units. At this point, actually, Immortals are kind of a waste. You don't really want to have too many of them left over. But here's that hit squad of the Zerg once again, abducting a unit this time around. Looks like he needs a couple more Corruptors to start one-shotting the units that he does abduct as well. And one cool addition right here is the Overseer on the same control group as the Vipers, and then also those Corruptors. Makes it really difficult for the Vipers to get fed back by those High Templar. Because if you mouse over it, there's a good chance that you actually hit an Overseer instead. So nice little move here. Zerg, though, finally finds a bit of an angle over at the 5th base. At the same time, there's that Protoss army moving through the center of the map, and while it does look like a lot of these Protoss units will get picked off as well, there's still not enough Corruptors to actually one-shot these Tempests. The 5th Nexus does go down, but at the same time, the base in the center for Zerg also gets picked off. Zerg, though, still wants to continue fighting here. I guess picking up a base right here is nice, but it's mostly just an eye for an eye, right? It's mostly just a trade right here as far as the bases go, and I'm not entirely sure if that's a really good scenario right here for Zerg, unless he gets all of these unit kills as well. If somehow, some way he gets these units killed, that's gonna be a really, really great spot for Protoss, or for Zerg obviously, but Protoss actually threatening a bit of a counterattack right here at the same time as well, is getting a lot of value out of these Archons and then also the couple Stalkers that are left in this unit composition. I love that. Ooh! Looks like 3 of those Archons will be teleported away And while the Stalkers get picked off, Drogo manages to keep the majority of those important units alive. Okay, so Drogo now is making the transition towards 3 more Stargates. That's 6 Stargates in total, plus he's making Zealots and then a lot of those Void Rays. Void Rays are phenomenal when it comes to dealing with Corruptors. Of course, they have an ability called Prismatic Alignment that allows them to deal additional damage to armored units. And I think that if he manages to get a good connection with them, he can deal a lot of damage. Once again, those storms chipping away at that army as well. Serral apparently now utilizing Roach Burrow out of all abilities that he's got. Zealots, though, are being forced to get warped in, and I guess that Drogo is going to send most of those units across the map, and as soon as the Zealots are gone, the Roaches will once again unburrow and continue picking off some more of those Protoss units. Alright, so we find ourselves in a very macro-focused scenario. The Roaches harassing as much as they possibly can. We see once again Zerglings flooding into the 3rd base. The Zealots trying to harass this base on the left-hand side here for Serral as well. But for the most part, both players have taken heavy amounts of losses so far. Look at that. Just slightly more losses here for Protoss, but I think it might not last too long as another base right here is getting picked off very quickly. There we go. By those Void Rays up in the air. Prismatic Alignment, though, has been utilized just now. Good High Templar fungals right there as well, as indeed Infestors are going to be the name of the game right now for Serral. He decides to make that switch. The Broodlords desperately trying to get rid of all of those Zealots as well. The Queen's actually utilizing their Transfuse on the hatchery to try and keep this one alive, but Drogo actually grabs himself a nice victory there when it comes to that engagement. I gotta say, I love the addition right now of those Infestors. Do they have Neural Parasite? Yes, they do. So, if you manage to get a good Neural Parasite on a couple of those Protoss air units, you can 100% change the tide of battle. If you can Neural a couple of those High Templar, obviously that's even better. If you can storm the Protoss army and use their tools of mass destruction against them, you can obviously snipe this army really easily. But on the flip side of that coin, we have the High Templar that have an ability called Feedback that can be utilized to actually remove the energy out of the Infestor as well. This is going to be very much so a micro battle. Both players are essentially maxed out. Zerglings once again actually, running towards the 5th Nexus. They managed to kill, I guess this is the 6th base right now, but they managed to kill at least a couple of those High Templar. The Corruptor swooping in right here from the left-hand side as well. They managed to pick up 2 of those Tempests for basically free. It comes down right now between the Spellcasters though. It comes down to the High Templar and then also those Infestors. Infestors, they have another spell, but they can utilize called Fungal Growth as well as a lot of those infested Terrans. We do see Fungals going down. A lot of those Neural Parasites being utilized as well, picking up as many of those Void Rays as possible, and that allows these Corruptors to move forward. They managed to pick up a couple of those Tempests for pretty much free, with the Corruptors now having free reign of the map and there not really being that much anti-air left over. I think that Drogo is going to be in a little bit of trouble as the Broodlords are now powering through. They're trying to pick up as many of those Stalkers as they can. They're trying their very best to keep all of those Broodlings at bay. But in one very clean engagement, Serral is the one who was just simply superior when it came to controlling that late game army. And with that, he obtains the victory in this match. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you did, make sure you hit that like button down below. And if you want to see more, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you get a notification as soon as I upload more. A special shout out to the Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome. Thank you very much. But for now, I want to thank you for watching. Have an amazing day, okay? Do not forget to smile. And I'll see you once again in the next one.